Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.
Now then, so we'll look at a few things this evening on Monday Night Rugby. Later on, the 36-man Ireland squad named this afternoon, and before that, the weekend's rugby. Munster 10, Leinster 13 at Thomond Park. And yesterday, Connacht 20 points to Ospreys' 26 was very disappointing for Connacht. They blew a 12-point half-time lead in Galway, so losing bonus point means they're second in Conference B, but still well behind Munster. A massive disappointment was the Andy Farrell verdict. We are joined by Ruaidhri O'Connor of the Irish Independent and Liam Toland, who was on commentary on Saturday at Thomond Park for Ayr. So Munster, Liam, will feel they should have won. There's question marks over a killer instinct or ruthlessness maybe. The flip side though is there is a sense that the gap is closing on Leinster.
Yeah, because coming into the game, Joe, it was like, how do we frame the match? There's an awful lot of talk about it being a final Irish trial, which I thought was probably over-egging it a little bit, because I'd be surprised if the Irish management hadn't penciled in an awful lot of their starting side. But that said, it was a must-win game for Leinster in the context of the competition. But way beyond that, culturally, it was a huge opportunity for Munster, and there was a real opportunity to win that game. And the side they picked, and particularly the bench they picked, I thought they had a real shot at it. And like in any game of rugby, both sides shared the pitch, they shared the ball, and they shared the referee. So it's all about how you impose your game on the opposition. And to be fair to Munster, they did so brilliantly in the opening 20 minutes, absolutely brilliantly opening 20 minutes. And we saw loads of really interesting attacking ploys that worked really well under high tempo. But the bottom line is, Munster, had they kicked their points, would have won that game, and it would have put an enormous different kind of complexion on it. And you think of Tadhg Beirne, I don't know if you saw his post-match interview, but he looked like physically wrecked, emotionally wrecked, distraught in many ways, and he was the player of the match. He'd an unbelievable game. So that's going to be a very cruel blow to Munster, who got throughout the game, had earned so many massive emotional gains, turnover scrums, turnover lineouts, turnover in the base. When Leinster threw an awful lot at them on their own 5-metre line, Munster's defence held out. And you think of the amount of teams that have conceded four tries and more throughout this season to Leinster, and Munster did an awful lot of work. So we still have, for me, it's more of a trial on Munster. Munster's style was enough to win, but they didn't kick their points. So does that mean that they changed the style, or did they change their personnel? But there's certainly question marks over what's going to bring them to the next level, and so many positives out of the game, but it's going to really hurt them for some weeks.
And if you were a player in that Munster camp, would your psychology be, this is good, we're getting closer, kick of a ball and we're in this? Or would you be thinking, bloody hell, if we couldn't win that game with that level of dominance at times, we'll never beat this lot?
Yeah, I think there's, judging by the language being used by Van Graan after the game, where he was saying things like they're the dominant team, they've been the dominant side in this, and we're improving. But team sport at its heart there's an individual selfishness that goes on, and the players within the group will have put in an enormous shift, and they'll start asking questions: what's going to get us to the next level? And there will be a ruthlessness, like we saw Michael Jordan, how he approached his ruthlessness. He made changes within his starting team, like he was part of that process. Tom Brady last night, we see, like, he doesn't have 10 successes in Super Bowl, winning 6 of them by being a nice guy. So there's an individual ruthlessness that possibly needs to come in around team selection and around what's the best 23 and what's the best style. But the style was enough to win them the game. Now, the worry in terms of style beyond that is, like, they didn't expose Leinster the 6-2 split they had on the bench. So you had a scrum half on the wing, and Munster's attack never really exposed that winger, that scrum half who's on the wing. So there's elements about their improving attack that's definitely there. And I thought, for me, Conor Murray had one of his best games I've seen in a long time. In the first half, he sped up the game. In the second half, he controlled the game. And you look at Sexton for the second quarter, really imposed himself on driving his team forward. And I think that's what probably Munster needed out half, is someone who's going to drive them forward when everything isn't working their way.
And so if we cut to the chase before I bring in Rory for his thoughts, Liam, you're saying style or personnel. Style seems to be in a reasonable place and improving. So personnel then, unfortunately, it's the nature of the number 10 jersey, spotlights on JJ Hanrahan. Is that who you're talking about, really?
Well, like, he kicks his points, they win the game, and everyone's happy, But if you look deeper then, and then you kind of brush over the style of the game and the style they're playing. Like, South Africa won a World Cup, and they deserved to win the World Cup, but they didn't play a huge amount of rugby in winning it. Like, their back three weren't scintillating, So that's the team we're kind of seeing in Munster, and Dale Andy is hugely significant in that process, obviously. But for me, at 10, they're still lacking someone who's going to you could actually see. So now I was one of the very few in the ground on Saturday, but you could actually see Sexton grabbing the entire fixture by the scruff of the neck and driving it forward. Okay, and that was at a moment when Leinster weren't playing well, so he was driving them forward. And you see Conor Murray was doing that a lot. So I think Munster, in a sense, needs somebody who can attend, who can drive it a lot. And remember now, we're used to seeing like a lines tourist, like a test line in that position. So we're kind of comparing an awful lot. But I think that's probably one of the pieces of the jigsaw that Munster, if they want to really progress into the next level, I think, because there's so much positives, like their bench, like their bench front row had a massive positive impact in many ways. But there's other aspects of the game, the conditions and the first phase, the lineup didn't work well for both sides and all that sort of stuff. But they're small little pieces that have to get fixed, and they're certainly on the right direction.
So, Ruaidhri O'Connor, for you, to what extent is the gap closing then?
I think it's narrowed to a degree, but I think there's some very familiar failings that let Munster down, and I think that should frustrate them an awful lot, because they fixed a lot of the things around their game, but they still come in and they're inaccurate around their set piece, which really there's no excuse for in a game. I think if you're going to beat Leinster in a game like this when they're at full strength, you need to be pretty much nailed on in every department. And when you have Leinster 10-0 down and rattled, making really uncharacteristic mistakes, Luke McGrath, Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose making bad errors and looking really shaky, you can't mess up your line out. And, they did that 3 times, and it basically gave Leinster the breathing space to grow into the game. When you have a chance to make it a 10-point game at half-time, you got to nail that kick. I know it hit the post, and it was a difficult kick in the first place, but then to compound that error by then giving away 2 soft penalties and giving Sexton a chance to make it a 4-point game at halftime is pretty criminal stuff in the context of the game. And then to let, the try is an excellent try, the one that wins it, but it comes from discipline. It comes from soft penalties, soft defence, falling asleep and letting Luke McGrath find big yards. These are all manageable things that Munster just aren't quite at the level against the best teams. They're not switched on for 80 minutes, and they're not at the level they need to be at. So they fixed an awful lot. They brought in 2 world-class players. One of them got injured. I think if you bring in Snyman and Carberry into that team, they possibly win the game, because you have that incredible energy and offloading carrying ability that Snyman gives you, and you have a better out half. And I think Hanrahan, who is a squad player who's been asked to be the main man at the moment, who's out of contract at the end of the season, and I'm not sure if he's been offered a new deal. I know his CV's been winging its way around France, so he's got uncertainty swirling around him. But it's happened too many times at this stage for Munster to be able to rely on him in these big games. I think you'll get good performances out of him. Claremont was excellent, and he deserved all the plaudits he got, and he's had great games like that. But he's equally had days where his inaccuracy has cost the team, and it always, the out half bears an unfair brunt, but that's the position he's in. It's why they earn the big bucks in the they're the best players in the game. So unfortunately, Joey Carberry hasn't been able to play for nearly 13 months now, and they're left with Hanrahan and 2 kids, and they don't trust the kids enough yet to play. But I think they're going to have to move on from Hanrahan soon, because it's not working. If you're going to win the European Cup, if you're going to win the Pro 14 and beat Leinster along the way, I think you need more consistency in that position.
Liam, where are Leinster? Are they on the up? Are they improving as a side?
You got to give them huge credit, don't you, for staying in. Like, it's a game they really could have won relatively easy. They put themselves in a lot of scoring positions in that opening first half, and they just kind of messed up their line out and their scrum turnovers, and then Tadhg Beirne's poach and all that kind of stuff. So, it was a big game for them and a massive win. Where are they? You got to take Gary Ringrose's first game back. I thought Robbie Henshaw had a super game at 12. Really good game. Created so many opportunities and space for so many other guys. Hugo Keenan full back. If you look at Dale Andy, he's just a monster playing in the 12 jersey. he just cut guys down at ease. Hugo Keenan glided past him, not quite glided past him, but certainly slipped past him. And he was the only one, I think, that De Allende missed. So Hugo Keenan, for me, is just such a beautiful ball-carrying full-back. They've got so many bells to whistle. I've always nailed my colours to mass and Rhys Ruddock, so it's brilliant to see him back as well. So there's an awful lot of components in there. But in the last number of weeks, their line-out hasn't functioned well. And that has to be sorted. I'm not entirely sure why it's failing, but it hasn't provided them the kind of the absolute certainty of the score, because we know their lineup mold can be so strong. So there's so many things, but there's a definite resurgence of energy when you think that Furlong is coming back to aid with like Porter. Did Porter play a full 80 minutes on Saturday? I think he did, actually.
Yeah.
So that's a huge reliance on certain players, but I think they're beginning to find their rhythm as well. And in some cases, a game like Saturday will do them the world of good, because they win so many games with such ease that this is the first, like, it's rare that Leinster aren't scoring 4 tries. So Munster deserve enormous credit for actually putting them into that dark spot. And the fact they came out of it will be huge fillip for them.
On Keenan then, there's a couple of individuals worth maybe discussing in light of the Six Nations on the horizon. It's interesting there, Liam, you mentioned his ball carrying, because at the moment what people are saying about Keenan is solid, mistake-free, safe pair of hands at full back, you know, and maybe the other aspects of his game aren't getting enough credit. His role in the try jumps to mind. And given the Stockdale injury, given the fact that Larmour was on the wing and it was Keenan at full back on Saturday, everything points towards him in a green number 15 jersey.
I've watched all the provinces play, and I've had the good fortune to be at the games. Like, he does all those things you've just articulated, but what he's actually doing that no other player at the moment is doing is he seems to be reading ahead 2 or 3 phases ahead when his team are setting up. And there's all sorts of 1-3-3-1s, and we know all the various formations and diamonds and all that. But what he's doing that's unique at the moment in the back three of what I've been seeing is he seems to anticipate a couple of phases before, and he spots space and he just glides into the space, and then the ball carrier is finding him. It's that classic case of he's expecting the ball carrier to hit him when he's at his most optimate point in exposing space. So it's not the other way around. A lot of ball carriers get the ball first and then they try and find the space, whereas he's finding it first, but he's also finding it 2 or 3 phases, like a snooker player, 2 or 3 phases ahead. And then the ball's, and it looks so easy and so graceful. And that's might be why people aren't giving him the full credit. But that skill alone, in a pitch that's 70 metres wide, and it's so hard to break down defences. As I said, he was the only guy to kind of slip past De Allende on Saturday, and that's because he's reading in advance of where the space is going to be. And he just cruises through it. And he looks so gentle doing it that he probably does himself a disservice, but it's an unbelievable asset to have in any team. For me, he has to be 100% at fullback.
Okay. Jordan Larmour is an interesting case at the moment, Rory. On the one hand, you've got the obvious, the brilliant feat. There was a passage of broken play at the end of the first half and the game came alive for a few moments. I think Keith Earls covered brilliantly. And then obviously, you know, he pops up with the try. So we know about the electricity, and then equally obvious to even the untrained eye are the knock-ons under the high ball. And that has been a feature of Larmour's play. You think of the Argentina game, the November International in 18, and he struggled that day. So figure out the solution there. Does he just have to play because of the gifts and you make do with the weaknesses?
Hard to know, isn't it? I mean, it's as a neutral observer, as a person picking your 15 that you want to see on the pitch, you'd have him in there because his footwork, his vision, his ability to threaten the line. Every time he gets the ball, there's a frisson of energy in the team because they don't know what's going to happen next in a good way. Because he just, even when Leinster were struggling on Saturday, every time they got the ball in Larmour's hands, and it was equally for Keenan and Ringrose to maybe a little bit lesser degree, but they all looked like they could do something in a way that none of the Munster players really did, and none of their teammates really did either. He threatened the line, he asked questions, he probed, he threw an offload at one critical stage. And I think there's an awful lot of value, particularly in the way the game is being played at the moment, where it's really hard, particularly test level, where it's really stodgy and you need someone to break it open. And I think the try he scored against Wales last season, when he broke the game open at home when he was fit in the first Six Nations before everything stopped, is a good example of that. I mean, he has been solid under the high ball at times during his career. I think of the first World Cup game against Scotland in Yokohama, he was rock solid that day. and he was unlucky to lose his place back to Rob Kearney, really, when the form he was in at the time. Something has gone awry in that element of his game, and I wouldn't claim to be an expert in backfield fielding and coverage, and I can't explain what it is, Joe, to be honest. But certainly Munster knew it, and his Ireland teammate Conor Murray, absolutely, almost to the detriment of the rest of the team's game plan, because it was working so well, they almost became fixated on hammering the ball up in the air for him, and he struggled with nearly every one of them. But he doesn't let it faze him, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I think it's got to be a priority for Leinster and Ireland to fix their backfield and the way they're covering at the moment, because whatever about Wales, England will absolutely destroy them in that area if they think there's a weakness. They go after that, and they follow it up with an incredible aggressive ruck when the team is scrambling on the back foot, and they get great joy out of it. But he's a bit similar to Stockdale. He has incredible attacking gifts, but just is lacking something in that regard that is a big worry at test level.
So Liam, if you're saying Keenan 100% full back, and we have Earls, who everybody seems to plumb for, and we have James Lowe back from injury, who's Larmour forcing out?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? And it's a real one to give us a real insight into the coaching structure to see what type of style of rugby they want to play. Because as Rory articulated there, for all the strengths, there are weaknesses. So certain coaches might err on avoiding the weaknesses, and some might promote the idea of the strengths. Like, he offers so much, doesn't he, Larmour, going forward? Absolutely offers so much. And you kind of think that, like, Andrew Conway, for me, is pound for pound possibly one of the best back threes in Ireland. He isn't quite in form. He isn't quite on the side in that. So I think Larmour probably still ahead. But to Rory's point there, Ireland play England in round 2. Will Stockdale be back? So I think for the first time in a while, certainly if you look at the back row, there's definitely a horses for courses. And to kind of marry that particular challenge, there might be a horses for courses, considering who Ireland are playing up first, but certainly second up playing England. You want to have a pretty tough back three, and that might mean that Larmour doesn't pick that particular day.
OK, sorry to interrupt there. It's actually France second, so it'll be Wales away first, and then France and Dublin, and then we breathe, and then Italy is the...
Oh, sorry. So,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We'll have England last. England's the Grand Slam decider, Liam.
Yeah. Sorry, my mistake. So sorry, England. But that means that. But still the point on the horses for courses point.
Yeah. Is
still valid.
Yeah. So Cardiff and France and Dublin are the first two. Yeah.
So again, and I totally agree with what Rory was saying about the England Wales. I know the English management said that Ireland are boring at their kicking, but statistically England way out kick Ireland constantly, and England's out half, way out kicks Ireland's out half. So by that, which is on the 20th of March when Ireland are playing England, that's a long way away. And I would say that I don't know the answer to it, but for me, Hugo Keenan is absolutely, and Keith Earls. So then it's about the coach would be nodding his hat to us regarding, is he more conservative or more freelance? Hopefully more freelance.
Do you know what, though? Suddenly, for all our complaints, Keenan, if he's as good as everyone is saying, and it seems like he's progressing beautifully through, and Keith Earls, and then a Lowe or a Larmour, and Stockdale waiting in the wings. Rory, that's not terrible by any means. I think we can feel pretty happy about that situation. Yeah,
and Andrew Conway and Shane Daly are in the squad today as well, and they're both very, very good players as well.
Yeah.
You know, you've good players like Dave Kearney and Mike Haley have both been going well and are probably unlucky, not to get a shout. But it's the kind of, like, they're all good individuals. What the problem for Ireland and for Leinster in particular has been trying to pull them all together as a unit. And I know Leinster defend the backfield with, I think it's 2 at the back, and Ireland may try something different. But, like, France are a very good kicking team as well. They've got a South African kicking specialist who seems to be the kind of the modern day Dave Allred, who's in there, called Vlock-Silliers, who I'm sure has been, like, that's his job at France, is to find weaknesses and oppositions from a kicking perspective, and he'll be coaching Dupont and Entomac to find that space that's there. So it's something Ireland really need to develop. I do think with Larmour's age profile, his potential, I do think, like, he is the future, but he's also good enough to be the present as well. I think you stick with him and you coach it into him, and you keep drilling that part of his game, because the upside is too good. And like, for all of Earls' excellent attributes, and he's a very fit man, he is 33, and I think that does need to be taken into account to some degree.
OK. A good headache for Andy Farrell then is the form of Tadhg Beirne. Against Connacht at the sports ground, he was everywhere in the ground, and a similar case on Saturday. Liam, you obviously gave him player of the match. So we had Matt Williams and Brendan Fanning on yesterday, and talking about the form of Beirne. He's hard to ignore right now. They were both of the opinion he doesn't have the size to play second row at test level alongside James Ryan. So if he's in that Irish side as a starter, it's in there as a 6. Is that how you see it, Liam? Is that the way it is?
Well, I think another way of framing that would be, what is he not doing that a second row should be doing? And I think that's how I answer that particular question, because if you take second rows like a Paul O'Connell and a Tadhg Beirne, they're drastically different players. Paul O'Connor would do exactly what it was supposed to be doing, whereas Tadhg Beirne has always had a sense of a free role to go for those steals. So he's not necessarily picking. I never felt that Joe Smith was his biggest fan. I have nothing to base that apart from not being selected. But I always felt that, so what are you prepared to give up to have him in the second row? And do you need a much meatier second row to smash and grab, like a Quinn Rue? Is it a horses for courses game? When you're playing Wales, when Ireland are playing Wales, in that first game, do you start with Tadhg Beirne? I think his form definitely puts him into the category. But if you're playing against England, I wouldn't be picking him in second row, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does a bit. So like the word Brendan Fanning used yesterday was a brute. He needs to be more of a brute. Is that the technical term?
Oh, absolutely. You think of what Klein, Klein gets an awful lot of negative press, but the amount of donkey brutish work he did on Saturday was phenomenal. The amount of, it's almost, I'm watching it live, so I'm seeing him flying in. You go, mother of God, he's smashing guys, and ultimately our game is a physical game on the corridor of power, and you got to dominate that corridor, and you need players to be able to do that. So then it's about a balance, and that's why I would ask the question: what are you prepared to give up by picking Tadhg Beirne in second row that other second rows are doing? Because no other second row, certainly very few in the Six Nations, can do what he's doing. So what are they doing that he isn't able to do? And that's kind of the trade-off. So I would say against Wales, there's definitely huge, because of his rich vein of form, and he did throw himself about on Saturday, but he's not naturally that type of player. So how disciplined to Andy Farrell's game plan? So that kind of goes back to another question. What does Andy Farrell want from him? And will he deliver that? And what are the trade-offs? But it seemed to me that Joe Smith didn't have a particular interest in having that trade-off.
Rory, the squad today, 36-man squad. There's lots of good news in it. Tadhg Furlong is included. He hasn't played since February 2020 between his calf and his back. So it looks like his load is going to step up now, and hopefully he's fit. James Lowe back in the squad. Dave Kilcoyne, Ian Henderson, all in. I mentioned Jacob Stockdale is out injured. No Luke McGrath, no John Cooney, no Kieran Marmion. So Conor Murray is in. Jamison Gibson-Park is in. And Craig Casey is in. As for the number 10s, Johnny Sexton captains the squad. Ross Byrne is in. Billy Burns is in. No Jack Carty. And I think Liam mentioned Rhys Ruddock, who has been in great form of late especially, is back in. A lot of people happy to see Rhys Ruddock back in the Irish squad. So Craig Casey caught the eye, Rory, for starters.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one, because he's ahead of some very, very good experienced players who've played in big games for Ireland over the years. I think there's kind of almost I laid it out today kind of by position with their ages and their caps alongside, and Casey, I think, is there for experience. I think it's quite clear that Conor Murray will start the games and Jamison Gibson-Park is there to come off the bench and add a different dimension, and maybe start a Wales or an Italy where you might think tempo is required. And I think maybe they think that rather than having Luke McGrath or John Cooney or Kieran Marmion, who have all the experience and can be probably called upon at reasonably short notice to come in and do a job from the start or on the bench, they're better off having this 21-year-old Tyro who's really energetic, who's really talented. I think could step in if required as well, don't get me wrong, but I think he's there partly for the experience of being a proper member of the Irish squad. I can't see him being involved in either of the first two games anyway. He might make his debut against Italy, but I see the value in it. I think Luke McGrath is really, really unfortunate. I thought he was excellent on Saturday. He got over an early mistake, and I think he was really key to the way Leinster won the game. Cooney's, I think Cooney just had COVID came at a really bad time for Cooney. He didn't do well out of lockdown and really hasn't been forgiven for that, because I think he's playing quite well at the moment. And Marmion's started games against the All Blacks in England that Ireland have won and is almost a little bit of a forgotten man, losing out in the World Cup squad. He could easily be in there. Caelan Blade could easily be in there as well. We're in a good position when it comes to scrum half. But I think Murray deserves a spot. I think he's been, I would have called for Cooney to be included last year, and And I think Cooney would have been the right call this time last year because he was in better form. But Conor Murray right now is the best scrum half in Ireland, the informed scrum half. And considering we have doubts over Johnny Sexton once again going into this window, he's going to be a pretty important player for Ireland.
Well, you've taken the words out of my mouth. So Johnny Sexton, Liam, a precautionary substitution. On Saturday, you said he was playing very well and kind of grabbed the game by the scruff of the neck a bit after those first 15 minutes when Munster were totally dominant and Sexton drove Leinster back into that game slowly but surely. So we don't need to go through what a brilliant player he is and how important he is for Ireland. The reality we're staring at, though, is in these 4 big games, with all due respect to Italy, the odds on Johnny Sexton completing 80 minutes in all 4 of them at this stage in his career are remote, to put it, at its most optimistic. So we have Ross Byrne in there, who did brilliantly for the try, and we've Billy Burns in there. The consensus is that these 2 lads are really good club players, and yet there is a deficiency at test level. And from Andy Farrell's perspective, the Ben Healy, Harry Byrne, Jack Crowley generation are on the way, but they're not here yet, that's for sure. So his hands are tied. This screams out as an area of concern for Ireland for the 2021 Six Nations.
Well, I think we should actually go further than the 2021 Six Nations. I think we look at the Rugby World Cup. I think there's, and Rory, you might correct me on this, there's about 26 internationals between now and the kick-off of the World Cup. About that, so whoever's going to be the starting out half to bring us through the pool stages, if it's not Johnny Sexton, it has to be somebody who has to have, arguably 50+ caps, okay? Really, to kind of drive that level of performance, has to have that level of experience in that. Otherwise, we're talking about somebody skipping over who you've just mentioned into a younger pool, and they'll end up having maybe single-figure caps by the time it gets. So that's my bigger concern. Now, we know all the background of the financial ramifications of the Six Nations, the importance of the competition and all that sort of stuff. But I would have grave worries that when we arrive to the World Cup, we're going to do so with an out half who might have 8 or 9 caps for Ireland and might be the first choice. And that's a real, real worry. That said, again, Ross Byrne seems to be spoken about as a club player. I think he's a super player. I think he deserves infinitely more respect than that. And you saw his cameo when he came off the ease which it is. No one in Ireland is touching Johnny Sexton. Johnny Sexton is a World Player of the Year. Johnny Sexton is a Test Lion. So we don't have a World Player of the Year Test line out half alternative. So we've got to go and find it. And that's why you think of what Rory was saying there in terms of Craig Casey. There is a richness of scrum halves to afford them the opportunity to bounce a Craig Casey into the system. There needs to be a boldness around what you do with Harry Byrne or what you do with, you go across the country and you think of all the different players there. I suppose the question for me is Rugby World Cup. There's a serious doubt about who's going to be our driving force at 10 by the time we get there.
Yes. And
there's going to be a lack of potential experience where you need at least 40+ caps at that stage.
Okay.
And the other one then is when is a player good enough to take over? Probably when he shows that he's going to be better than the current guy. And I think there's players below Billy Burns and Ross Byrne that are going to be better than those 2 guys, and I think they should be promoted as a result of it.
Namely who, if there's one, if Andy Farrell says I've only time to really invest in one?
Well, we now see that Munster are going to have to start shifting to Ben Healy, and I think that Harry Byrne, I haven't seen a whole lot of him, but by all accounts, he's well worth taking a look at. So I think we need to get him fast-tracked into international games.
Okay. I mean, it was a pity with Harry Byrne, the Northampton game was meant to, it was there on a platter for him, and obviously got injured in the warm-up. And so, by the way, Liam,
that's obviously Carberry. I haven't conveniently not mentioned him, but clearly, if Carberry comes back and gets running game,
sure,
he's a class player. So
look, that's the magic. That's the magic solution for sure. And he was on the pitch in the warm-up, which is progress of sorts. And in no way, if I sounded disrespectful to Ross Byrne or Billy Burns, that wasn't the intention. But I was definitely repeating the consensus, I would say, from pretty much all the pundits we talked to, that there is a deficiency at test level. So do you have enough faith in Ross Byrne to the extent that he will be 27, 28 at his peak come World Cup time? Would you be quite happy for a 28-year-old Ross Byrne to be leading Ireland, and that's a semi-final reaching out half?
Well, I think there's a considerable gap between him and Johnny Sexton. So my hope between now and the World Cup is that we find someone who can bridge that gap better. Yeah. And if it's Ross Byrne, fine. If it isn't Ross Byrne, we need to go find that person. Like Ross Byrne, what has he got? 11 caps? Like Billy Burns has got 3 caps.
Yeah.
So even if it is Ross Byrne, well, he's got to start playing a lot of games at international level to find that rhythm. Like if he plays every single international between now and then, he's still going to have under 40 caps for Ireland by the time we get to the World Cup. So that's my point.
Yeah.
How much time do these guys, whoever it is that needs it, that's assuming, by the way, Johnny Sexton at some point in time doesn't continue and that Carberry doesn't become a viable option for all the reasons. So, like, we need to start preparing for that eventuality.
Yes, no, it's fair. So, Rory, come in on the proviso that Joey Carberry, unfortunately, isn't back to himself and that Johnny Sexton isn't at the World Cup in 23. What do we need to start doing pretty soon? And by the way, you know, I would remind you, for poor old Andy Farrell, before the Scotland game last November, like, the knives were being sharpened. You know, if they didn't beat Scotland after that Georgia performance, Andy Farrell was going to have a miserable Christmas. Like, this is the pressure he's under.
Yeah, no one said management was fun, did they? Like, you got to. I think you have to at this stage operate on the proviso that you're not going to have your 37/38-year-old out half is not going to make it to the World Cup, because that's what age he'll be at that time, and it's completely unprecedented for a Tier 1 nation to go to a World Cup with a player of that age. If he defies all belief and does it, fair play to him. I hold my hat out to him. And I think you have to operate under the proviso that Carberry is not going to get there either, and take it as a bonus if he does. And if he does, and if he gets back to the way he played in that Gloucester game, which I think is what we all hang our hat on, then you're talking. You've got a player more than capable of doing it. And the one thing that I would say against what Liam said, which made an awful lot of sense, was that the All Blacks did. He's a player of incredible quality in Richie Mo'unga, but they did change their out halves just before a World Cup. I suppose it didn't work out for them against England, but they did play quite well at that World Cup, and they did look quite good with Mo'unga running the show. So if a player of good quality comes in at the right time, it's possibly not the end of the world, but it's not how you would plan it. It's not how you would put your World Cup cycle together. Byrne is the one, Ross Byrne. I think that Northampton game was a nod to that, and if he'd come through that, I think he would have been in for this. If he'd come through and played well, but like,
do you mean Harry? Sorry, Harry. Yeah. And Harry, Harry's made big mistakes in games that he's played this season, and he's learning on the job. And as you would as a 21-year-old, and he gets away with it when he's playing for Leinster against Edinburgh seconds, and they beat them by 60 points regardless. He's not the finished article, and I guess there's an element of protecting him against making those mistakes when a million people are watching against France or England in a big game. But there's, like, I like Frawley. I think Frawley's a really, really good player at Leinster, and I think he's one that maybe must contemplate making a move, because he's playing at 12 at the moment. But I think he's got all the physical attributes and a lot of what you look for in a Test 10. And from what I hear within Munster, Crowley's got the greater ceiling of the two of those with Healy, but at the moment he can't get in the Munster 23, so that's a big problem for Farrell. So I don't know if Farrell could have picked anyone else based on form. You just hope that Ross Byrne can play the way he played off the bench in Thomond Park for Ireland. So far he looks to play within himself. He goes into his shell a bit when he plays for Ireland and hasn't been able to take over. And maybe that's Johnny Sexton's shadow. Maybe he doesn't feel as comfortable. I mean, he did get an absolute. If he looked up the big screen when he was coming on in Paris, it wasn't a massive vote of confidence. I'm not sure, but like, Ross Byrne has a lot going for him, but at international level he hasn't shown it. Maybe this is the window where he'll get maybe he gets a start against Italy. Maybe Sexton's hamstring doesn't recover and he gets backed against Wales and he goes out and plays well, and then he's got the jersey. But yeah, it's a massive red flag for Ireland right now. That and Lucette proper, I think, are the two areas that you'd look at and go, geez, that age profile isn't good, and there's not much coming through below it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, he gets a lot of bad press, Ross Byrne, but then he comes on and does great things for Leinster. And he's had some raw deals with Ireland, like Twickenham in the summer of 19. It's hardly going to accelerate your comfort level in an Irish jersey. He was almost thrown to the wolves that day a little bit. What else then, as we wrap up, and we are wrapping up, what else is on your mind from the weekend, Liam? Anything else from that Munster-Leinster game you had wanted to mention that I haven't asked you about?
It's like, a lot of people were saying it was an Irish trial. For me, it was a massive Munster trial about what's going to bring them to the next level. And it was a really big opportunity for them, and they put themselves in position to win it, and they didn't. So I think they have to be pretty honest about the style they're playing, and maybe certain the personnel they're in. We've discussed it. A notable absentee from the Irish squad is the inside centre for Connacht, Daly, who I thought has been exceptional the last few weeks. Maybe a little bit unfortunate not to get a nod there, and it's a little light on Connacht players, and there's some decent Connacht players who've been playing well. So that's kind of my summation in a way. And go back to Ross Byrne finally. He only has 11 caps.
Yeah.
You know, he's a child in the international stage. I still think he's got an awful lot of quality to play, and it'd be lovely to add to that with his own game. But younger guys coming through, we may need to fast track them with so few games left between now and the World Cup.
Yeah, well, like when you spell it out like that few games, really, it's pretty much here, isn't it? Rory, anything else from the weekend we should mention?
I think Connacht will be pretty disappointed to throw away a big lead at the sports ground. Another bad decision in the championship minutes when Abraham Papali'i tapped and went and they were turned over in the next phase. It's a game that, you know, they'd want to be winning because they you know, that Leinster win is looking like a bit of a flash in the pan at the moment, the way their season's going, and that's unfortunate because it had a lot of promise earlier on. And I suppose if we're talking about, you know, lads who were unlucky to miss out, I think Gavin Coombs must have been in with a shout. I thought he was very good on Saturday. But I think that game and the squad today demonstrates that Irish rugby, apart from those couple of little areas, it's in a pretty good shape going into the Six Nations, I think. You know, like if you're leaving out players of that calibre and the names we're doing, we're naming, like it's as strong a squad as Andy Farrell's been able to pick from. So he's operating off a decent base going into the Six Nations, I think. Okay, good. Optimistic note to finish with. Ruaidhri O'Connor from the Irish Independent, thank you. And Liam Toland, always great to have you on, Liam. Cheers.
Thanks, Joe.
Cheers. And I should mention as well, we are having a Grassroots series on the show right across the week, looking at various areas of grassroots sport in Ireland. Lots of good content already, and it'll be coming at you across the week, including, hence I'm mentioning it, rugby fans. Stuart Lancaster is going to be on with Nathan on Thursday, giving his sense of grassroots Irish rugby and the development avenues right the way through to professional level. So that's coming your way on Thursday.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.